I'm voting because the EU can help us reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and increase our energy security.
I'm voting to keep the Green Deal, Europe's big plan to make our economy more sustainable, on the agenda.
I'm voting because the EU can support the development of a renewable industry in Europe, creating jobs and economic growth.
I'm voting because the EU has set goals for increasing the use of renewable energy.
I am voting because the EU requires countries to be more efficient with the energy they use.
I'm voting because the EU has set the way for developing renewables in harmony with nature and with people.
Use your vote!
Hi everybody, and welcome to this really important discussion about why we all need to vote in the EU elections. My name is Philippa Nuttall. I am editor of Sustainable Views, a publication published by the Financial Times. And so I think we all understand that the next 4 years are going to be crucial in terms of climate action and meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, and also in terms of meeting the targets set in the EU in terms of the energy transition and in terms of the direction that the EU economy goes. The session this morning is very much aimed at helping you join those dots and explain what's at stake in terms of how EU policies around the energy transition work, both at an EU level and in the member states, and can feed into the work that you're doing. So we want this to be very much a session that helps you explain what's happening in your work. So please, at any point in time, do ask some questions in the Q&A. We'll go through 3 sessions first, and then at the end there will be a chance for me to ask those questions that you put in the chat to our speakers. So the speakers we have today are Philipp Schulmeister, who is Director of Campaigns in the Communications Directorate at the European Parliament. And we have Evelina Hartstein, who is Head of Unit in Communications and Outreach in the European Commission's Energy Unit, DG Energy. Before we kick off, we're going to have a little poll, which is going to hopefully appear on all your screens. You should be able to vote. And so we want to know, do you think your vote influences EU policies on renewables? So please just tick one of the options. You've got about a minute to vote. And while you're voting, we shall move into the first session today. So the first session we're going to look at today is on the theme of what is the EU doing about climate and clean energy. We'll come back to the poll results in a minute when we've got the exciting results to see whether you think your vote changes anything. So Evelina, perhaps while we're waiting for the results of the vote, you could explain to us a bit more about what the role of the EU is exactly when it comes to climate and energy policies. And for those of us in Brussels, we get very used to talking about the Council and the Parliament and the Commission, but perhaps you could also explain a bit more in terms of how the various institutions work together to create these policies. Thank you.
Sure, gladly. And thank you very much for inviting me here. And thank you for organizing this seminar. I think it's a great opportunity for us to take a step back from what we do on a daily basis, as you, Philippa, said, and try to translate a bit it into more layman terms. So I will do my best, but please do not hesitate to let me know if I am speaking the EU jargon, as we all tend to do. First of all, the most important thing that one always starts with when talking about energy and climate policy, and in particular energy, this is where I am coming from, is that according to the treaties that set up how the EU functions, the energy is a shared competence. This is determined by the provisions of Article 194, and that means pretty much that any member state and every member state is free to decide on their energy mix, which is very important because every country has a very specific set of conditions that determine how they organize their energy market, what their energy mix is, etc. So the EU doesn't have a competence to decide that, but there are a number of other provisions and a number of other legal requirements that any member state is bound by, and they come from the regulation of the single market, to environmental laws, to international trade laws, etc., etc. And this is a big framework that determines how the EU energy policy is actually being shaped and formed. And if you allow me, Philippa, just a couple of words. We are in this period in the mandate, the legislative mandate lasts 5 years, and we are in this pre-election period where we do a lot of summaries. And I think it is important to take a step back and see what we have done over the past years as EU, what we have achieved as EU. The Commission here is an agent. We have the right of initiative. So it's the Commission that proposes legislation that is then put to the considerations of the European Parliament and the European Council. And these two actors come together in what we call informal negotiations, or trialogues, as this is referred to. Trialogue because the Commission is still part of it as honest broker. And this is how laws are being shaped and formed. And we have achieved a lot. We do not have the time to spell out everything that happened. And I would assume that also a part of our audience is knowledgeable about what has happened in the renewables sector, but just perhaps as highlights, we have started off with the European Green Deal as the first political priority of President von der Leyen. We have swiftly adopted the very first important legislation which determines climate neutrality by 2050. Some refer to it as carbon neutrality, but this was our first framework that gave pace to a number of other legislative and non-legislative proposals. So we came with a Fit for 55 package, and this has an overall number of more than 20 files that pretty much set the roadmap of how we want to get to 2030 with our targets, and then 2050. I will come to the targets in a moment. Again, I assume they're known to you, but we have this Fit for 55 package that was in the process of being negotiated when the war in Ukraine broke out, when Russia aggressed Ukraine. And before that, even when we had the economic relaunch and prices of energy started going up on the wholesale market and then on the retail markets. And this compounded, these two factors combined created a necessity to speed up even further our energy transition. So we have come up with a Repower EU package. And we adopted a number of different, again, legislative, non-legislative, and emergency measures to set us on the right path to speed up a clean energy transition, move away from our dependency on Russian fossil fuels, and make sure that while we deploy more renewables, we also save energy as much as possible. So we are, this entire process of different legislative steps is being finished as we speak. Today, one of the council formations has endorsed our electricity market design, which is an important, very important element of the bigger puzzle, and also new legislation on renewable gases and hydrogen. This has just come through. Next week, we're looking at the final endorsement of new regulation on methane. This is also where the EU is a leader on. We are the first global actor to have a concrete set of rules on methane emissions, on their regulation, on their control, on and reporting and verification. So again, a lot of good things have happened. Philip, I don't know if you want me to go into the detail of any of this, or we will have maybe time for that later.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview, Evelina. Thanks very much. I just wondered if you could explain a bit more, because I think it's perhaps slightly confusing for people who aren't necessarily in the Brussels bubble, this idea that member states have competency over energy policies, but at the same time, we sort of have these targets set at an EU level. So if, for example, we take Fit for 55 and these headline targets are agreed, what do member states have to do with those targets? Do they have to obey them? Can they ignore them if they have competency around energy policies, or is it just a question of interpretation?
No, the member states have to report on a very regular basis on the achievement of the targets. We have the headline target, and the Commission's role is to make sure that the progress achieved by all member states that we monitor very closely with them brings together the ultimate results. So again, the targets have been set since almost 30 years ago now. So we had around 2010, we had the first framework looking at 2020. Then we have a framework looking at 2030, and we are going to start discussing what happens beyond 2030. For this, member states have to very closely stay in contact with us. And we also have a very specific regulation, the governance regulation, that determines precisely how this process has to work. It's not only about renewables, it's also about energy efficiency, it's about greenhouse gas saving. So again, we monitor trajectories, we are in contact with member states we have also what we call the national energy and climate plans. And this is the main reporting tool. So every member state had to, a couple of years ago already, submit a plan on how they intend to reach the targets in 2030 with a long perspective. And right now, we're also in the process of reviewing these plans. Energy is a very dynamic field. It changes a lot. It changes regularly. We have to bring in a lot of factors related to market developments and other conditions that have changed between high energy prices, the war, and our new legislative framework. And just to remind that now we're looking, for instance, in the renewable sector at achieving 42.5, with the aspiration of it actually being 45%. Of renewables being in the final energy consumption in the EU in 2030. So we are looking at it very closely. The regulation plans foresees a mechanism if there were a gap. And this is the gap filling mechanism where we would work with the member states. We're not getting there yet. We're waiting for the member states to submit their plans, and they should all be in by the end of June. Perhaps some delays will happen, but in the autumn of this year, the Commission is going to then precisely calculate, identify, and check how we're faring when it comes to achieving these targets. And we will be issuing recommendations to member states on how to proceed with the process.
Thanks, that's great. And so in our exciting poll for today that we've kicked off with, 80% of respondents on the call today say that they think their vote influences EU policy on renewables. So given that these policies are sort of made in Brussels in a way, could you explain a bit more, Evelina, how people's votes do actually influence energy and climate policies?
Very, very gladly. The explanation will not be perhaps energy specific, but it is important to understand a bit how policymaking works and why I am invited to the seminar, although the European Parliament would be usually the institution to target with such a discussion. In fact, there are two things to that. As I said, we already have a very rich and a very well-developed legislative framework. Either it exists since at least a couple of years ago. Before talking about Fit for 55, we were talking about the clean energy package. This is still provisions in place, in force, that are being implemented, and their implementation is being monitored by us. Then we have the new sets of rules that either are entering into force around now or will enter into force in the future. And here, there is a need for continuity. So the Commission is the executive arm of the European Union, if you so wish. And one of our responsibilities is to monitor how member states transpose and implement legislation. So from that point of view, we will keep doing this. We have this framework that is out there. But of course, with the new mandate, we will also have new political priorities. We will start with the president-elect announcing the political priorities for the 5 years to come. And we, of course, cannot prejudge what will be there. But in the nature of the process, what will be the points that will be indicated as priorities will then translate into very concrete action inside the Commission and in sectoral directors general like mine for energy, for instance. So we will be rolling out a plan on what needs to be improved, what needs to be pushed further, what needs to be perhaps corrected if we see that there's been a mistake. And the result of elections has a very important influence on this, as no political program can be a success story if it is not done together with the two other actors, the European Parliament and the Council. Every political family in the Parliament, we call them groups. Outside of the Parliament, they function as European parties. They have their own programs, they have their own views. And you know it very well, views are very polarized. So ultimately, while the president-elect and ultimately the president of the Commission will be the person determining our sense of direction, the program will have to be receptive to the needs and wants that will come from other political actors, so that it is a joint effort. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, any ordinary legislative procedure requires the consent and the ultimate agreement by those actors as well. So it is good to set certain things out there from the beginning. And that's why we are also very much attuned to what is going on in the European Parliament and with our colleagues, and see how we will have to adapt our own work according to the result of the vote.
Thanks, Evelina. Philippe, I'm aware that we've mentioned the European Parliament a couple of times there. Would you like to come in at this stage? Perhaps I know that you're going to give us a presentation in the third section of this morning's session, but perhaps just explain a little bit more about the groups in the European Parliament and how that works exactly in terms of how people vote. Or do you want to do that towards the end?
Well, I can come briefly in. Thank you very much for this. Indeed, of course, as we all know, the prerogative for proposing legislation is and remains with the European Commission. But the outcome of these elections clearly will have an impact as of day one on the adoption, on the approval, on the discussions on the political legislative program for the European Commission for the next years. It will have a direct bearing on specifically topics involved around the Green Deal, involved around renewable energy policy in general. So the outcome of these elections on the political topics you are most interested in over the next 5 years cannot be overstated. And in this context, indeed, the outcome with a view to the composition of the European Parliament across the various political groups is crucially important. Evelina, you have mentioned this. There has been clearly a more intense political debate on these issues over the past months and years than maybe we have seen in years before that. There is, I wouldn't call it yet polarization, but there is a heated debate that might lead to interesting results as we have seen over the past month, and surely over also over the next months and years. I would expect from, but we can come to that point a little bit later maybe, I would expect maybe a larger fragmentation. Fragmentation might even be too sharp a word, but more diverse opinions uttered with a stronger backing by the electorate over the next years. We might see a shift politically from a politically centered majority in the House that is relatively balanced across the aisle, left to right, towards perhaps a majority shifting, at least perhaps on the committee stage, rather to the center right. So all these issues will need to be taken into account, and all these issues are therefore highly important when it comes to why actually your vote in these elections is important.
Thanks, Philip. Yeah, we'll definitely come back to those issues a bit later on. Perhaps before we look sort of forwards as to what might happen, Evelina, you can just give us a little bit more information in terms of what's actually been achieved in the last 5 years in the last mandate of the European Commission in terms of the energy transition and the Green Deal as well, which Philippe mentioned. But I don't think we've perhaps we could do a little bit more detail about how that pulls together as well, and it's a little bit wider than just the energy transition per se.
Indeed. So again, I already mentioned it and hinted at it in the beginning, but we have started with the first comprehensive framework and a clear sense of direction, which was the climate law. So we are the first continent, and I do allow myself to consider the EU as, you know, I consider wider Europe here. We have this ambition to become climate neutral by 2050, and a lot of work has to go still into that. But we believe that this is absolutely achievable. We have a set of, the energy framework is the one that I know, of course, best, and it's very, very comprehensive. So we have reviewed the Renewables Energy Directive, and here a number of things have been agreed upon. The target itself, we've mentioned 42.5%. But we also have new targets, for instance, for an indicative targets of 49% of renewables in buildings, and also for the industry, an indicative target to increase every year by 1.6 percentage points the annual share of renewables in energy consumption. And if you look at the figures, we have actually, thanks to this and thanks to the efforts linked to Repower EU. Again, this is a plan for the EU to move away from the Russian fossil fuels and accelerate clean energy transition by deploying more renewables and by making sure that we save energy where possible. And figures speak for themselves. We have now been breaking every year the record of the renewables deployment. So for 2023, we have a total of 73 gigawatt of new installed capacities, and that breaks down into some 56 for solar and 16 for wind, and both are a significant increase. And overall, when we look at the energy mix, we have, in terms of electricity, we have 1/3 more renewables than we had in 2021. We have also indicative strategic targets, so an ambition to arrive at certain goalposts as well for other renewables. So for instance, biomethane, where we said that we would strive to achieve to produce 35 BCM of biomethane by 2030, and we're a bit more than halfway there. We have also an ambitious plan to roll out the heat pumps. So you know about the ambition that needs to be now really accelerated to get to a 10 million deployment between 23 and 27, and reaching up to 30 million by 2030. So this is quite an impressive achievement and result. Again, we continue on the path. We've been monitoring it year on year, and while we were already very happy to see it evolve over COVID, when there was a decrease in consumption of fossil fuels. We see that these trends continue, and everything that we have put in place is working. So there is the Renewable Energy Directive that has been adopted. There is the EU Solar Strategy that also determines a number of ambitions. We have created the Solar Alliance that supports the industry in the rollout. We have the EU Solar Rooftop Initiative. We have large-scale partnerships that was launched in March of last year. So here a lot of good developments. We've looked at wind in particular. We have zoomed in on wind recently with the October Wind Power Package. We had also the special action plan on how to make sure that we not only deploy the capacities, new capacities, but how we operate in the international environment, how we increase skills. We've mentioned that for solar already, and how we empower consumers and other market actors. And if you allow me just to mention two other pieces of legislation here, we've also adopted as Commission the Net Zero Industry Act, which is people tend to compare it to the IRA Act from the United States, but it's really our comprehensive response on how to boost competitiveness, European competitiveness worldwide, how to make sure that we produce more, how we consume more of these technologies also domestically, and how we can export our capacities, creating a better level playing field and reducing barriers pretty much. And we have listed there around 19 technologies, I think, that would belong to the bigger categories of net zero technologies. So we hope with this and the right financial incentives, we will be able to boost the sector even further. And one other act, the electricity market design that we mentioned, that's also very big, comprehensive, and a lot to say. A lot of also, complex technical issues that have been put on the table. But in the broad outline, it empowers consumers. It protects them from the volatile price dynamics. We have put forward proposals that have been agreed upon that create more certainty, market stability, and send the right financial incentives. So there will be more boosting renewables in the system in the future with the electricity market design implemented quite soon.
Thanks, Evelina. Well, you've not been bored in the last 5 years, that's for sure, with all those different policies and measures. So yeah, there's lots that's happened in the last 5 years. Now we're going to open up another poll to you, the audience. And what we'd like to know is whether you're confident that momentum will continue for renewables. So again, you should have about a minute to vote as to whether you're confident that this momentum that Evelina has outlined will continue in the next 4 to 5 years. So while you're answering that poll, I'd like to come back to you, Evelina, and then we'll move to Philippe. But you mentioned various sort of issues that I think are perhaps key in terms of, for our audience. You've mentioned, empowering consumers, protecting consumers. There's also the issue of energy security around renewables, with the war in Ukraine, etc. Are these sort of the kind of key messages and key themes that you think people should be pulling out from the energy transition rather than just necessarily start talking about climate change in terms of getting people to vote?
That's an interesting question. Maybe to explain, we have since let's say 2014, 2015 worked around the concept of energy union, and this energy union has three main priorities: making sure that energy is clean, that it is secure, meaning that we have supply of energy that we need and there are no shortages, no blackouts, but that we also respect all the standards that come with that, and that this energy is affordable. And I think that we have been really trying to make sure that all the elements, all the three elements are really well respected. So in the new solutions, we see a huge jump. And again, if you allow me to elaborate further beyond the renewables only, the electricity market design, as was already devised in the past, was a front runner here when it comes to empowering consumers, when it comes to, for instance, allowing switching of suppliers, comparing contracts, or developing tools that allow a comparison of the offers on the market. And this has now been also replicated for the gas sector. So we see that consumers are invited and encouraged to be much more present on the market, to act in an agile way, create communities, share energy as much as possible locally. There were provisions that we have also tried to encourage and strengthen the energy vulnerable groups of societies everywhere. So for instance, we now have a ban on disconnecting energy vulnerable and energy poor people. So again, a lot has been achieved there. We have added now this important competitiveness component. This is over the past year and a half already quite on our minds, and we hope to see this boost further.
Thanks, Evelina. So that was perfect timing, because we now have the results of the second poll. So 63% of our audience are confident the momentum will continue for renewables, 13% saying no, and 25% are not sure. So not quite as much confidence in terms of the first poll that we saw the answers to. Philippe, you mentioned the certain changes that could potentially happen within the European Parliament after these elections, and you mentioned a move potentially towards the centre-right. Perhaps you could talk us through a little bit what the polls are showing, and whether our audiences should be confident that momentum will continue, or there are certain concerns that are there in terms of where we move now in terms of renewables and the energy transition.
Okay, yes, I can surely do that. Currently, I mean, of course, we still have 20 days something to go until the election proper, and therefore we cannot really say what the outcome of these elections is going to be. But from how I would read the polls for the time being, I would say that most likely the EPP group will remain the strongest political force in the European Parliament.
Sorry, Philippe, could you just explain who the EPP is, just in case people are not aware of the different groups?
Of course. So the EPP has been, over the past years, decades, maybe even the largest political force in the European Parliament. It's the European People's Party, so therefore centre right, originally Christian democracy, now partly with a strong conservative touch to it. Its member parties include, like the German CDU, for example, the Austrian ÖVP, Italian Forza Italia would be members of Polish PO would be members of the EPP group. They are set to remain the largest political group in the House, I would expect, followed, and that is a repetition of 2019 results. There might be slight losses for this political group, but nevertheless, strongest, I would expect them to remain. Followed in second place by the Socialists and Democrats, so social democratic parties across the 27 EU member states. They should remain in second place. I don't see much of a momentum here anymore for the S&D overtaking the EPP to become first. I think that ship might have sailed indeed. So that would be the first two. Then in the middle region, if you want medium-sized groups, we have a battle royale for third, fourth, and fifth place. This is between the Liberals on the one hand and two right, center right to right wing political groups in the House, the one being ECR, European Conservatives and Reformists. This is where you would find, for example, Fratelli d'Italia from Giorgia Meloni, from Italy, where you would find Polish Law and Justice. These are the two big players in the ECR group. And on the other hand, the ID group, Identity and Democracy. So this is rather a right-wing political grouping where you have parties like the Dutch Wilders PVV, where you would have Austrian FPÖ, where you would have the German Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, and other like-minded parties. Here, we have a relatively close-fought battle for the third largest group. For the time being, the Liberals are again in the lead here, followed more or less ex aequo with the two other parties. But this is too early to call. And the more important thing is what we are going to see on Sunday, the 9th of June, so an election night, is only the first part of this journey. This is when the electorate, when the voters have spoken, but a very second crucial part comes to it, and that is the phase between election night and the beginning of the first day of the constitutive session of the European Parliament, at which day the political groups need to have formed. And this formation of the political groups is not completely clear yet. Why? You have around 50 to 60 projected seats for parties that are currently not yet represented in the European Parliament. Again, as an example, I could give you from the Netherlands, the Farmers Protest Party BBB, or I could give you a new center-right, again from the Netherlands, party from Piet Omtzigt, the New Social Contract. So these would be parties who are not yet represented in the European Parliament, who are very well placed to receive at least one seat, if not more, in these elections, and who would need to find a home. I mean, they will, they might. And this exactly finding a home, or in other terms, negotiation process will start latest after election night, with the new parties or the new members not yet affiliated, seeing with different political groups where they might go. And as 2, 3, and 3, 4, and 5, these on the placements, Liberals and the two right-wing groups are so close to each other for the time being in the polls, where these 50 seats go, will make a decision on the composition of the parliament, will make a decision on the majority scenarios that you would have in the parliament. Currently, if I'm putting the projection on the basis of the outgoing parliament, the only majority scenario that is really practical is as we had it now: EPP, center right, S&D, center left, and the Liberals plus the Greens. These four would be what you might call the constructive pro-European center. But depending on how much ECR or ID grow, there is a chance for a center-right majority in the House, maybe not in full absolute terms, but at least, as I said before, with a shift of the political center, a shift of the gravity center, more from the center towards the right. So that might very well influence decision-making as of day one, already starting with choice and election of top posts.
Thanks, Philippe. That was super clear. Great explanation there. So we're going to ask another quick question before we move into Philippe's presentation. So do you think there's at least one outreach activity you could do to mobilise your colleagues? So again, you've got a minute to answer that. And in the meantime, we'll hear from Philippe, who's going to give us a presentation about voting in the EU. Thanks, Philippe.
Thank you. So theoretically, that might mean I should receive. Yes.
All working?
Yes.
Good.
Let's see. Yep, I have control. That is good. And now, so that's me. Okay, we have seen that. And we now move in here. Good. The second purpose, I think, of this webinar today is to try and equip you, provide you with tools, tips, and hints what you actually might do in the run-up to the elections. Not that we have that much time left. Use your vote. You might have seen this already on various social media channels or out-of-home advertisements, at least here in Brussels, but we have it also up in quite a lot of the member states. Use your vote is our baseline for this campaign. Actually, since 2-3 weeks, with a second line enhancing it, or others will decide for you. Now, this is a concept I think you might find yourselves quite familiar with, because all of you who are working for your various policy topics, for renewable energies, for solar power, are quite aware of the fact that you need to bring your voice to the table, to the conversation. You need to add your positions to the conversation in order to be heard. And in order to have a chance that these positions of yours, these needs, these expectations, requirements are taken up in policy making and in the final decisions. Now, we can, I believe, quite easily translate the same concept of use your voice to the elections proper also, to democracy as a general concept. If we do not use our vote in elections, and this is the same for local, regional, national, or in this case, European elections, then someone else will raise their voice, will use their vote, and therefore take the decision for us. So either we do our part in voting in these elections, or we have to live by the fact that we are living by someone else's decisions and potentially also in someone else's democracy. Now, communicating on the European, oops, that was one too much, I suspect. Can we go back? Can't go forward, can't go back.
Oh dear.
Here we are. So I'm trying not to touch anything anymore. So communicating on the European elections, of course, is a multi-layered exercise. We are all very clear that specifically when it comes to political content, election campaigning, elections are first the prerogative of political parties and the candidates. We are very clear about that. What we would like to do and what we do as a European Parliament is to look for partners, to look for allies who are sharing with us the message that it is important to vote, that there are many important reasons, possibly all equally important, to go to vote, to use your vote. And this is what we're doing today. This is what I'm doing today with you, actually asking you to help us and communicate, talk to your stakeholders, to your networks, in order to equip them with the information necessary to make an informed choice. How can we help you in doing this? First, there is the main elections website of the European Parliament, which actually, truth be told, this time is more of an interinstitutional exercise, working together with the Commission, working together with the EAS to bring one-stop shop for all election 24 European election related information. You have there the first and main arguments on why to vote, how the European elections work. This will also be this page where we display the election results on the election night proper, where we give the links to our campaign materials. I come to this in a second. And where specifically we also have the possibility to find the information how I can vote in my country, or actually in 3 different ways: as an Austrian in Austria, as an Austrian living in Belgium, or as an Austrian living in Argentina, for that matter. If I want to vote in the European elections, how can I do that? The second page I would like to direct you to is together.eu. Why together.eu? This is the website that we have set up for our ground force, for the volunteers and for the supporters who would like to get active and do their part in communicating on the European elections. But it is also the place where we have positioned our download center for all available campaign material, visuals, and assets. So there you will find ready to print material. There you will find all our Use Your Vote videos that we have launched with quite good success now 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. There you will find social media posts, pre-made assets, and everything that you might want to use in order to communicate on the European elections with the visual identity of the European Parliament, full or in part. Wrong one. So, but that brings me to a quite important point. Why should you engage? And I apologize now if this is maybe too much company focused, but whether we are talking about civil society organizations, professional associations, or even private companies, the reasoning stays the same. You and we are all, in the one or the other way, societal actors too. And having the role of a societal actor brings social responsibility. Parliament's core narrative for the 24 elections is democracy. Democracy and engagement. Democracy, because we do understand that the democratic processes around the world, and also to some degree within the European Union, are not a given, cannot be taken for granted, are experiencing, in some cases, some backsliding even. So democracy, and with it, in the context of the European elections, a strong European Union, do not only benefit all of us, they also need our active support, our engagement. And as we have discussed over the first part of the seminar, of this webinar, Parliament will adopt laws affecting industries, economic sectors, citizens alike. And all these decisions do start with our vote, with your vote, with those who actually do vote. And it's very clear that some will not engage and some will not vote, but those who do will be able to influence the decisions for themselves, but also for those who do vote. So what we are asking for in terms of partnering up is stand up for democracy, support the power of voting. The more people vote, the stronger democracy becomes. But very clearly also add your voice to the conversation. You're already adding your voice on the issues that are important to you, because you know that if you do not speak up on all the issues that are important to you, someone else will actually do so in your place, but from their point of view. And I would ask you to do the same thing now. Speak up on the topics that are important to you in the next weeks until the European elections. I'm completely agnostic as to what you would like to talk about. Talk about whatever you want. Talk about whatever is important to you. Talk about what you think is crucial for these elections and for the next 5 years, maybe with one common denominator: to use your vote in these elections because they matter. And that in turn is also what we are not asking for. We're definitely not asking you to take a stand on any side of the political aisle. I mean, I cannot forbid you to do so if you wish to, but this is a question that we're very often asked. Are you asking us to take a stand, a political stand? No, we don't. European Parliament is running a politically neutral campaign as an administration, and what we are asking you is not to take a stand, not to become a surrogate for the European Parliament campaign, or simply to use our campaign material. What we're asking you is to talk about the issues that matter to you. There is a range, there is a range of possibilities that you could do. A very, very simple one actually starts with save the date posters. Why is it simple? Because first of all, on the together.eu download center, you find immediately the mock-up for this poster in all the languages that you can use, print out and use in your workplaces, in your offices, actually in the window of your home if you want. And it's also crucially important because believe it or not, there is still a too large number of citizens out there who do not really know when the European elections are exactly taking place. Take a look at your smartphone now while you're listening to me and tell yourselves whether you have put the voting day already in your agenda. Trust me when I tell you, too many people forget about it at the end of the day, because then suddenly they have something better to do on that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. And saving the date is one of the easiest things that we can do. Sorry, too quick. 2019 and both 2000 and also 2024 have already presented with a wide range of possible actions that civil society organizations, professional organizations, companies, private people are taking. Let's start with internal HR communication. Basically, your options are twofold. You can go internal comms, you can go external comms. Lots of organizations and also companies have chosen to go external, to have their own social media campaigns, to even have their own out-of-home campaigns, to have product placements if you wanted to use their products in order to contribute to the European elections. And some go in addition or exclusively with internal communication. Your networks, your employees, your staff, you can communicate on the important to vote with your topics on those issues that matter to you in your newsletters, on the payslips, in events, in messages from the CEO, from leading staff in the company. That's a possibility. Or like the video that we had seen at the beginning that you had prepared. Social media campaigns, there is quite a lot that is happening already online from various stakeholders, starting from visuals, filters, stickers, themed videos, interviews again with managers, CEOs, saying why voting is important for us on that matter. Posting and sharing the campaign video, use your vote only contributes to the, I think we have in the meantime 250 million views on our main video over the past 2.5 weeks. So share into the success in sharing it across your networks. And of course, there is quite a lot of companies that go, for example, like Lime and Uber with free rides and discounts to polling stations. There is companies like Tinder who are putting it in their in-app. There is quite a lot of interesting and creative. Spotify, for example, is going to go out with their own playlist. So there is a lot of movement. You will not be alone if you come up with your ideas, with your actions over the next 2.5 weeks. You'll actually join a growing number of associations and companies and citizens across the European Union raising their voice in order to motivate people to use their vote in the elections. And I think I leave it here. I suspect we will share the presentation afterwards with the participants. So the toolkit for the private multipliers is at your disposal. And we are as well multipliers at europal.europa.eu, and we'll try to help you on the way with whatever you might need. Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you, Philippe. So plenty of inspiration and ideas there. And indeed, we will, everybody who's attended the webinar will receive an email at the end in the next day or so with a recording of this session and the various documents and slides. So everybody will have the information they need. So in terms of the answer to our third poll, do you think there's at least one outreach activity you could do to mobilise your colleagues? Only 52% said yes. 7% said no, and 40% were not sure. So hopefully after hearing Philippe's presentation, those figures may have changed slightly, and perhaps more than 52% actually think there's something they could now do to mobilise their colleagues, and even something, as Philippe said, quite simple, which could cause a difference and encourage a few more people to get out there and vote. Philippe, I was wondering, do we know what the expected turnout is supposed to be? Is there a figure?
Well, it's quite interesting. 2019, as you know, for the first time ever since the first European election, 79, saw an uptick in turnout by 8 percentage points to 50.6. And every single data point I have seen until the last survey that we have launched or published actually in March points toward a higher turnout than we had in 2019. 71% in this last Eurobarometer survey said that they would be very likely to go to vote in the European elections. Now, of course, there is a huge difference between I can maybe visualize this with my own situation. There's two possibilities or two options. I can say I will start a diet next Sunday, and this is very, very different from me actually starting a diet next Sunday. So far, never has happened. Now I'm a little bit more hopeful when it comes to participation and turnout in the elections. I don't expect 70% turnout, but I would not be surprised if we see something that is clearly above the 51% of 2019 and somewhere in the range of 55, 56, 57% turnout across an average across the EU. Let's see what happens. But one thing is very, very clear. Citizens understand to a far higher degree the impact of European decisions on their own life. The crisis points of the last 10 years have contributed to this, whether it was starting with the economic and financial crisis in 2010, migration crisis, Brexit, transatlantic relations, then walking into the corona crisis clearly, and everything that the European Union did in this context, up to energy prices, cost of inflation, cost of living crisis, inflation, up to this day. All these different crisis moments have shown one thing to people: that if the European Union acts, it has an impact on their lives, and this increases their interest, their understanding that these elections are important, and by consequence, the willingness to participate. So yes, I think we'll see a better result in 2019.
Okay, thanks, Philip. Well, there's a bit of room for hope there, so that's that's great. In terms of the questions we received, they're quite negative. Evelina, perhaps you want to answer. So one person has said energy companies are increasingly comfortable stating their scepticism about 2030 climate targets and them being met. How is the mood around Brussels? Do you see a risk in this scepticism, or can it spark renewed action? And a sort of similar question we've had from somebody else as well, it's saying there's no problem with a shift towards the right, but as a workforce in renewables, can we accept climate deniers and groups talking about climate hysteria? And sort of how should renewables organizations prepare for the idea that more people sort of may question what's actually happening? They, for example, reference the recent farmers' protests and saying, burning tires on the Luxembourg Square seems to be effective, perhaps more effective than slightly more gentle diplomacy. So yeah, so perhaps in terms of this negative sort of energy, which also Philippe has alluded to before, how should renewables groups be responding to that in terms of encouraging people to get out there and vote?
Thanks. Very quickly, since we're running out of time, and indeed it would be good to finish with a very positive spin rather than kind of focusing on what's negative about it. But when it comes to the first question and the shift to the right and how to fight actually populistic messages, it is not a problem that is only appears in energy. It's a big question how you counter populist messages in general. And I think that we have two ways to do that. First, counter it with concrete, solid, founded in research and analytical work replies. So countering the messaging out there, which is not an easy task, and it will never be easy because it's simpler to say something that rings a bell and, you know, sounds to somebody like, oh yeah, this must be an obvious truth, whereas facts point in the other direction. So we need to bring out the facts more. And the other thing that the Commission is trying to do a lot, especially these past months, is an effort in debunking myths. So we have a disinformation network, and we're using the representations of the Commission in all the member states to share information, either as a special campaign that we noticed. For instance, we had big surge of comments in the German-speaking communities about heat pumps and gas boilers and them being withdrawn from the market or banned completely by the European Union. Or, for instance, about the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, where there was also a lot of mis and disinformation about what it is that the Commission has proposed, what it is that will be agreed upon, and how much it will cost, and that we will prohibit our grandmothers from selling their homes. This was pretty much the narrative around it. So there is a lot of work from our side coming, and of course we are using our channels to disseminate it, but it's always good to check these channels where we try to put a lot of information that can be also helpful to replicate. When it comes to not meeting the 2030 targets, I don't want to sound it like a joke, but of course companies can be skeptical. The burden of delivering is on the member states and the national administrations, and of course they have to work together. And 2030 is in less than 6 years now. We have 5.5 years. We will be doing stock taking, of course, along the way. So I do understand that while we have certain targets that are inscribed in law and have to be delivered, some are indicative or are an expression of an ambition. So we also have to balance, you know, what is feasible in the changing environment and the changing context. What it will mean for the future, it's very difficult to predict right now. I think that we will stay on this trajectory. Everything that is put in law has been agreed upon by everybody, and there is this consensus building and a big mechanism in Brussels around that to make sure that once we have a solution in place, everybody strives to achieve that. So of course, if we, let's say hypothetically, do not achieve 42.5% in renewables, but 40 or 41, we will have to see, you know, is this a problem? And more importantly, from the 2030 perspective, will be where this brings us towards climate neutrality. So again, this is a law, and we hope that everybody will remain committed to it. I do not see big forces or a big majority now backtracking on what we have decided, because, you know, this sounds like a mantra and something trivial to say, but climate change is advancing, and we also need to make sure that we do our fair share of mitigating it. And this is through this big legislative framework that I've described, and other types of legislation that also exist now in other sectors, such as transport. We do have responses to that. So I think that I'm not too worried about it, but we might have to, you know, look into greater level of detail on how to deliver and what the 2040 milestone should be on the way.
Thanks, Evelina. I'm sorry we had to rush slightly. Very quickly, Philippe, one question is, when will we see the first results? Is it the 9th of June in the evening? I presume certain member states will come out with their national results beforehand, or do we have to wait till the evening of the 9th?
Well, according to European law, no member state should come out with results before the last member state, which in this case is again Italy, finishes voting at 11 o'clock. But that does not mean that the publication of exit polls and similar isn't allowed. It is. So that means for the European Parliament, we will again be the one-stop shop collecting all the information, election results from across the European Union. We will start as of 6 o'clock in the evening for those countries who have finished voting with the first national exit polls where available. We will have at 8 o'clock, slightly after 8 o'clock, the first projection for the full hemicycle, the full European Parliament. This will be based on a mix of data, exit polls from those countries who have finished voting, and the last available pre-voting day surveys for those countries who still are voting. And then we move every week refining these projections until 11 o'clock when the last country finishes voting, and all national election authorities are allowed to publish their national election results. And then we move on from projections to a full result presentation. But the first reasonably robust indication of how this evening will go, 8 o'clock Sunday night.
Perfect, and great moment to finish on there. So I'd like to thank Evelina and Philippe for their presentations and answering so many questions this morning. That was a really important discussion, I think, that was organised by the Energy Transition Initiatives and organisations based in Brussels. As I said before, anybody who's participated will receive an email with the information that we've had shared in the session this morning. I think also if you go to Wind Europe or Solar Power Europe's websites, there is also information on there in terms of the European elections. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate as well. That was a super interesting discussion. I can only echo what Philippe has said and encourage everybody to vote. It sounds quite positive if we've got a higher level of potential voters than in future elections. So fingers crossed that is the case. And if you can all just stay online for another couple of seconds, I think there's a video which is going to play us out. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
We're voting. Are you?